Welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing something a bit different today. We're stepping right into the shadows to look at some of the most highly classified, completely secret events in modern history. We're going to unpack the true nature of statecraft. And when I say statecraft, I am definitely not talking about, those highly publicized treaties signed with fancy pens on international television. No, I'm talking about the hidden missions, the backroom negotiations, and the deeply buried operations that literally rewired the modern world. We're looking at those intense historical moments where the standard rulebook just gets completely thrown out the window and sheer pragmatic survival takes over.
So what if modern history actually happened behind closed doors? Seriously, just think about that for a second. Growing up, we're taught all about these loud declarations, public elections, and grand speeches. It's what fills our history textbooks. But what if the most significant events, the ones that actually shifted the tectonic plates of global power, were planned in absolute secrecy? Imagine a world where you're reading one narrative in the morning newspaper, but the actual decisions dictating your future are being made in classified, windowless briefing rooms, completely hidden from the public eye and only revealed to us decades after the fact.
Now, let's take that idea just a step further. What if a single intelligence apparatus had the immense resources and basically unchecked power to fundamentally influence foreign governments? We are talking about an organization operating strictly in the shadows, actively funding covert missions all over the globe. I mean, just think about the sheer logistics of that for a minute. The sprawling infrastructure, the billions of dollars in untraceable budgets, the massive network of operatives you'd need to carry out these paradigm-shifting operations that stayed classified for years. It sounds exactly like a cinematic spy thriller, right? But it isn't fiction. This was and actually still is reality. Okay, let's dive into this. That agency, the one quietly pulling those massive levers behind the scenes, it's the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Today, we're stepping right into that hidden world of espionage, covert missions, and classified history to figure out exactly how the CIA came to be. And more importantly, we're going to explore the unprecedented power it was handed and the incredible, sometimes highly controversial lengths its operatives went to just to secure a global advantage during one of the most volatile periods in human history. Let's set the stage. In 1945, World War II finally comes to an end. The whole world essentially breathes this massive, exhausted sigh of relief. Cities are in rubble, millions of lives have been lost, and people desperately just want peace. But, as we know, that peace was remarkably short-lived. Almost immediately, the geopolitical landscape starts fracturing again. By 1946, a tense, very different kind of era was taking shape. The alliance between the West and the Soviet Union completely dissolved, and it was replaced by this deep, suffocating paranoia. This was the dawn of the Cold War. The stakes were impossibly high, and the sheer fear of global communist expansion meant the rules of engagement had to be completely rewritten. Which brings us right to 1947, a totally pivotal year where the National Security Act is officially signed into law. This era was a massive turning point in how conflicts were actually fought. The old era of warfare, that relied on tanks, bombs, and massive armies fighting for territory on traditional, muddy battlefields. But the Cold War was a completely different beast. You simply couldn't win this new conflict with traditional firepower. In fact, because of the emerging nuclear stalemate, a traditional war would literally mean mutually assured destruction. So the battlefield had to shift. Driven by this intense ideological battle between the United States and the Soviet Union, the new weapons of choice became intelligence, technological supremacy, and global influence. Espionage basically became the only viable way to fight without ending the world. Because of these terrifying new global threats, the United States realized they needed a highly dedicated, centralized tool to navigate this invisible war, and the National Security Act of 1947 was their answer. Now, this wasn't just some boring piece of paperwork that opened a new office building full of spies. Not at all. This legislation fundamentally restructured how the U.S. government handled global threats and military intelligence. Enacted in direct response to the looming shadow of communism, it completely reorganized the U.S. armed forces, foreign policy, and the entire intelligence community. This exact moment in time marks the official birth of the CIA. Now, you might be wondering what they were actually told to do. Well, what's really fascinating here is the actual language of their early mission. The CIA's original mandate was incredibly simple on paper. Their goals were just to gather foreign intelligence, protect national security, and help American leaders make informed decisions. It sounds almost bureaucratic, right? Like a quiet advisory board, simply gathering information and briefing the president over a cup of coffee. But as history quickly showed us, There is a massive, gaping chasm between those simple, innocent-sounding goals on paper and the incredibly complex, often deeply messy reality of executing statecraft on the ground. Over the following decades, the CIA took that foundational mandate and expanded it exponentially. They definitely didn't just stay in Washington organizing files. They quickly evolved into the world's most powerful intelligence organization. We are talking about a monumental shift here, moving from passively gathering intelligence, just listening to what the enemy was doing, to engaging in active covert operations. They were out there instigating changes, executing highly classified missions in countries all across the globe. They were operating in the shadows on a truly massive international scale, actively shaping the politics, economies, and leadership of foreign nations. And this is where we get into the really crucial point: how we view their historical legacy, which is distinctly dual-sided. On one hand, some operations were highly praised as vital missions. They successfully protected U.S. national security, dismantled immediate threats, and defended American interests during extremely volatile times. But, on the other side of the ledger, we have the highly controversial operations. When protecting national security requires you to operate outside the boundaries of international law, the moral gray areas become incredibly dense. These were missions that sparked fierce global debate, pushed the boundaries of sovereignty, and raised intense questions about consequence and oversight. Honestly, these are questions we're still grappling with today. Which brings us to one specific, honestly mind-blowing detail from the declassified records: the directive to, quote, recruit former enemy scientists. Just let that sink in for a moment. The United States realized that the enemy they had literally just defeated possessed incredibly advanced aerospace, chemical, and military technology. To win this new Cold War, to secure a critical advantage over the Soviets, the agency decided they needed the absolute best minds in the world, even if those minds had spent the last decade of building weapons for the very regime the Allies had just destroyed. This was the true nature of statecraft in this era: pure, unadulterated pragmatism, overlooking past actions to secure future geopolitical dominance. It shows you the absolute extreme, uncompromising lengths the agency was willing to go to in the name of national security. This chillingly pragmatic strategy was the foundation of one of the very first and most highly controversial secret missions in modern intelligence history: Operation Paperclip. It wasn't just a single mission, really. It represented a defining philosophical shift in modern statecraft. It set a precedent that survival justifies almost any means. And it leaves us with a profound question: what are the true ethical costs of Operation Paperclip? If the technological world we live in today, our space programs, our modern defenses, was built in part by the minds of our former enemies, how do we measure the true cost of victory? When national survival is on the line, where exactly is the line drawn? It's a deeply layered question, like a giant moral puzzle that history is still trying to solve. And it's exactly where I'll leave you to ponder today. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and remember, keep asking the big questions.